Okay, so apologies for starting late. Today is the May 20th meeting of the Newmarket Budget Committee, and let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Brian, can you join, lead us, please? Sure. Okay, it's 6:34, and we'll open for public comment. Seeing none, we'll close public comment at 6:34. Okay, so attendance: Ned Carpenter.
Here.
Tim Choi.
Here.
Scott Foster.
Here.
Justin Lusser. Brian Hickey.
Here.
Danielle is not here yet, and Brian Rowley.
Here.
Dan Smith, not yet, and Brian Ward is
Here.
Thank you very much. Okay. So today we are going to hear about Q3 results for the school, and we welcome Todd and Jenna.
Jenna will present, and I'll be happy to help answer questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Todd Allen and Jenna Mellon for the record.
Hi. Thanks. Hi. How's everybody? Thank you for having us tonight. Obviously, these are our Q3 financials, so we still have 1 quarter of our operations left. We do believe that most of our encumbrances are reflected in this. But again, things in that last quarter, things can change. We can have additional expenditures or different revenues that come in. We'll have a more, more updated financial picture sometime in June for our school board, and then obviously when we close our year, that's the real, the final number. So I'll start off, and if anyone has any questions, just let me know, and we can stop if I'm going too fast or if you have a particular question. So kind of starting off, this looks different than last year. You remember when we came last year and we had a pretty significant anticipated amount left of our expenditure budget as of Q3. This has been a really a different year. A bunch of different reasons for that. The first of which, not insignificantly, is that with each new budget cycle, we're trying to actively present a budget that increasingly ties more closely to our need. So that means the tighter we budget, the more accurate we are, and the less variance you'll see. So that's part of one of the reasons. The other is this budget includes some salary adjustments that were made after the budget was set. It was part of a plan for, we did a salary compensation study, and we were able to absorb the first year of the salaries in this budget based on making alternative choices with how we had initially budgeted. It was a goal of the school board for us to do so because one of their goals was retention and attraction of good staff. So that was a priority for them that we were able to adjust and make. The third thing is changes in staffing need. We do our very, very best as part of the budgeting process to project exactly what we're going to need for staffing. But as you know, our staffing needs are driven by our student needs. And sometimes we get shifts that come throughout the year and our needs change. We are still held to our appropriated budget. We often have to make decisions to reallocate monies in different ways to meet those needs. So this reflects, we had a couple of the notable changes. Due to some students with some high medical needs, we brought on 2 full-time health aides, which was a kind of a new position for us. It was a reallocation of some of our paraprofessional support and other support staff into that role. We added what we call day porters. They're basically custodial in nature. They cover our lunch periods and help make sure that the cafeteria is clean and there's someone there to man it if something spills or what have you. Initially, those positions were part of our contracted outsourced facilities custodial services, but we found that we could more efficiently do them by those 2 positions and have better attendance by hiring our own people. So we reduced our outsourced contract with an MOA accordingly, and then we filled these two. And then finally, as we were coming into the beginning of the year, we realized coming out of COVID, we've had a difficult time restaffing up our substitute roster. A lot of people that were subs in our buildings during COVID, elected not to maintain themselves on the roster. Gentle plug, if anybody would like to be a sub, we'd be happy to take you. But as a means to cover our classes and ensure that continuity of instruction for our students, we did create a position, a full-time substitute, and we had 2.5 of those people. So they were in our buildings every day, but they didn't have a set schedule. They would adapt to where our coverage needs were. As we budgeted for this next cycle, we took a look at that model, and we feel that by more aggressively recruiting, things are loosening up after COVID, and we're hoping that we can be more cost effective. That's a very expensive way to staff a substitute because it includes benefits which you normally wouldn't offer to a substitute. So we're looking at increasing our daily per diem substitute roster so that we can still meet the need, hopefully at a lower cost than we did in this cycle. And let's see, and then there were a couple of unfilled vacancies that we had throughout the year that are listed here as well. So the net financial impact of all of those changes boiled together resulted in slightly higher overall labor costs in fiscal year 2024 than we had budgeted, which will be offset by operations expenditures that we don't expend. I'll take a pause there. Does anyone have any questions? Because that was kind of a lot. No?
I was actually just curious on the grant reduction piece. Is that just kind of wash out from COVID time? Is it just the natural kind of ebbs and flows of grants or the trend?
So unfortunately, our trend there are basic grants that most schools in New Hampshire have. We fondly call them the title grants because there's Title I, Title II, Title IV. Those trends for Newmarket and for many districts in the state have been trending downward, meaning that our allocations aren't not just level, but often a decrease. And as we get into the, talking about next year in our end of year financials looking down the road, I'll be giving you a greater snapshot of what we think our allocations are for, 24, 25. But we estimate what we think our allocations are, but sometimes they don't come in that way. And so one of the things that happened at the beginning of this year, before we started our teachers, we realized that our Title I allocation, which had funded a full teacher, really didn't have enough funding to fund that same full teacher. So we reallocated it. We wound up funding 2 tutor positions with those same monies, but we could not fund a full teacher. So it wasn't a one-for-one. We wound up having to absorb a little bit more staffing cost in our regular budget to cover that teaching position. But yes, and then the ESSER funds, we have had some positions that were covered during COVID by grant funding. Some of them we've built into our budget going forward, but the ESSER funds will also go away as of September 30th of this coming year. All of the groups of ESSER funds. Yeah.
The position in the business office that was intentionally not filled. Mm-hmm. Next year, you plan on filling it, or is it a position you don't think you need anymore?
Oh, we desperately need it. It was a strategic decision we made to reallocate that funding at the time. Part of the basis for that decision was that we were bringing online a new financial software, and we're hoping to gain some efficiencies from that software. So part of the impetus for not hiring was we weren't sure exactly what we were going to need in the business office, and we didn't want to hire a position for like an accountant and then find out that what we really needed was some HR support. So we had the time to live with that, and we have actually hired a wonderful Newmarket resident who will be joining us as of July 1st. The position wound up being an assistant business administrator. It was formerly an accountant. We wound up revamping it as assistant business administrator, and kind of changing the job description to make it be the best fit and provide the highest level of efficiency, and fill the need in the business office. So we will be going back up to that position in the 24-25 school year. Any other questions on that part before I move into the expenditures? All right. So as you can see on page 2, high level overview, we break our expenditures down into three basic categories: salaries, benefits, and operations, which is kind of the other. You can see that we're coming in pretty close. We have, if everything holds at this time, we estimate we'll have about $46,000 left in our salary budget. We estimate only $16,000 left in our benefits budget. And in operations, we're estimating about $439,000 remaining, giving us a total of just over $500,000 of unexpended expenditure budget as we come into July. Again, with my caveat from before, obviously those numbers can shift based on what happens in the last quarter of the year, but that's our best projection as of March 30th. The revenue side, pretty consistent with what you've seen in the past. Local revenues primarily, unnaturally primarily, are made up of funds raised by local taxation. Wish there was another way to do that. State revenues consist of our adequacy aid and our state education tax, which is technically a state tax, but it is actually raised and appropriated locally and given directly from the town to the school. So when you're looking at the impact of taxation, that state tax is still raised off of property valuation. And then finally, federal revenues we discussed a little bit. Those are our title grants, ESSER funding, any other type of grant that we can apply for. We always try and put our hat in the ring for anything. And so those are kind of our three giant categories for revenues. Any questions on those high level? All right. So the next thing, food service. Food service is intended to be a self-funded fund within the school, meaning that our expenditures are supposed to match up with our revenues. Unfortunately, like most districts in the state, that's not always the case. We wind up expending money to run the program because it's so important for our students to be fed and have nutrition at school. And we also have a meal charging program that permits any student, regardless of whether they have money on their account, access to a breakfast and a lunch at school. Hungry kids just don't learn. And that's so that when you do that, we do our best to collect on negative student balances and things, but often we end the year with negative balances we can't collect. And that's part of why most food service funds kind of run in the deficit. We had on the bright side in the food service, we had availability of something called supply chain assistance grants. We've actually taken advantage of 4 different groups. They started during COVID, but they've still continued to come. They're not a windfall of money, but added together, they have provided a benefit to our food service program. This year, we've got a 4th allocation, which is about $24,000. So the way that those work, they pay you the money in advance, and then as you expend money throughout the year on eligible expenditures, it has to be minimally processed. There are certain requirements. We then can use that money to offset our costs that we pay our food service management. So it winds up at the end, we under-expend against our budget, but we're using grant funds to supplement, if that makes sense. So as a result of that, we're looking at coming into this year in a pretty good place. We had budgeted for like a $30,000 deficit. We don't think we're going to be anywhere near close to that. And in addition to that, because of the COVID waivers that were in place, you may remember a couple years ago, every child ate free, and then we were reimbursed from the federal government for that. We ended that 22-23 year with $141,000 in the plus. So we can't use that money to offset taxation, but what we can do is carry it forward to cover any future deficits we may encounter in subsequent years. So last year, we only had a $10,000 deficit. We still have $131,000 that we can carry forward for the next several years, hopefully for a long time, to cover our deficits. But again, it depends on what our ending balance is, how much of that we have left. The other kind of impact, financial figures that we talk about too, that are not our revenues and expenditures in our food service have to do with our capital reserves, expendable trusts, and impact fees. Those are other forms that we can use to fund operations. They all have certain restrictions and certain limitations, but they are very beneficial in planning, especially for capital expenditures or for other types of things. So at the end of this report, you'll see a listing where I've showed you what we have in forget the page number, I think it might be the last one. Yes, on page 11, you can see the capital reserve balances as of March 31st. You can see the remaining bond fund that we have left, and we talk about that a little further. And then on page 10, the impact fees. So we have $277,000 as of March 31st in impact fees. Those can be used for expansion of facilities, growth in the community. That's why they collect them at the town. And so we are looking at projects with the board for ways we can use those. They have a 6-year cycle, so they don't expire for 6 years. So we're making sure that none of them expire, and we're looking to plan with those funds for some of our capital needs and growth. The bond proceeds remaining, our $39 million school bond from a few years ago. We have, in essence, completed the project, but we still have a small amount left. That's shown on page 11. It's a little over $200,000. Now, it's been a while since I presented these. We have $214,000 roughly in the bond fund. Of that, $8,000 is interest, which we cannot spend. That needs to go back to the taxpayers to offset. But we have about $208,000 left in there. So as we get into the next part of my report where we talk about decisions we were looking for the board to make, I can update you on what the board's decision was relative to that. So preview of coming attractions. We are really pleased and excited to announce that we were able to, there was a new law that came in January 1st of 2024. We just redid the playground, and we literally completed it the first week of January 2024. A law came in saying that all playgrounds constructed after January 1st, 2024 had to have accessible pathways made from a resilient, solid surface material that's not a loose fill or aggregate. When we built our playground, at the time this law did not exist, and we used bark chips, which are compliant and safe, but not necessarily the same way that they are looking at the new law. So while technically we did not have to adhere to this new requirement because our playground was complete before it, we thought that in the spirit and the intention of the law, if we had ESSER funding available to do so, grant funding, it made sense for us to make those modifications so that we can have a fully compliant playground. So that's what we did. We requested to use a balance of some of our ESSER funds to do that. And this summer, we will be putting in that resilient, you probably have seen it before. It looks like a mat, but it's solid, it's poured. It looks almost like a concrete, but it's made of rubberized granules, so it's soft for students. That will be in the fall zones, and it'll also be in pathways leading to each piece of equipment so that someone in a wheelchair could move along those paths without getting stuck in the bark mulch. So we are pleased to be able to say that we're doing that enhancement without impacting taxation. And then one that I'm cautiously optimistic about, this has come before us earlier, but the New Hampshire House created a bill 1279. They've had similar bills in the past. And this bill, if approved and voted and enacted into law, would permanently restore a state payment of 7.5% of our teacher salaries for New Hampshire retirement. Right now, we pay 19.64% of our teachers' salaries for New Hampshire retirement costs. That's the employer cost. Say nothing about the 7% the employees pay. So if this happens, 7.5% of that 19.64 would wind up being paid by the state, raised elsewhere. That would be a significant amount for us. I figure it's going to be over $100,000, approximately $140,000 that we would not have to raise and appropriate locally to meet that need. So very excited, fingers crossed. It did make the crossover from House to State to Senate, but it's with an advisory committee in the Senate right now, and they don't have anything further since April 18th was the last date they updated it, but fingers crossed on that. We also applied for and received a small grant for lead remediation. We had fully remediated our facilities with the old standard, which was 15 parts per billion with our water testing. The state lowered that to 5 parts per billion. We retested again. We had five locations that fell between the 15 and the 5. So we have remediated them. We've retested. Everything is fine. But we were able to recoupment of the costs associated with those additional remediation efforts. So we have gotten that. We had applied for a National School Lunch Equipment grant, waiting to hear on that for a popcorn machine for another healthy snack option in our food service. And that kind of sums up our down the road. Any questions on any of those areas?
Just, if you don't get the grant, I noticed there's still $2,000 for equipment in the lunch program or the food program. Can they use that for the, I'm just curious, it's not a big deal, but.
Yeah, we could. They generally take, at the end of the year, they try and replenish equipment that got damaged or utilized in the year. So that may be a great option. If we have equipment money left, we definitely would recommend that. But a lot of times trays get broken and they have to replace some things. So they try and give us that list so that next year they're ready to go. But it's a great thought, though. Anything else?
It's not really a question, I apologize, but I think I read that the Newmarket school system was ranked one of the highest in New Hampshire, so you've been very busy.
If you don't mind, I'm gonna pass that off to Mr. Allen, because that is something that we are all deeply proud of, and he can probably speak to that much more eloquently than I can. On the educational side of things.
I just wanted to say congratulations.
Yeah.
And I instantaneously sent that over to my mother-in-law, who wants us to move to Maine. Said, this is why we should say Newmarket.
Yeah.
So,
If I could just, because it is quite a nice accomplishment. We were ranked #1 high school in the Seacoast and top 10 in the state, and one of the top high schools in the United States. So it is really wonderful, and it's based upon a lot of data that's been collected over the years. But it was funny because I came to us from Oyster River, and I got to reach out to my colleagues in Oyster River and say, we're ahead of them. My assistant superintendent came from SAU 16 in Exeter. We're ahead of them. So we've had some fun tweaking our neighbors, saying, hey, what's going on, guys? We're leaving in the dust. So thank you for that. That was quite nice.
Yeah. And it is something to be proud of, too. Just to mention, it's how many years in arrears? It's 2 years in arrears when they award it.
Yes, the data is for 22, so we just keep updating it each year.
So it's a little bit retroactive.
Next year.
Yeah, there we go. We'll do it again next year. So the next section, I kind of, and I told you I'd speak with you about it. There were a couple of things I was looking for the board to think about and make some decisions as we come into the end of the year, some choices they had to make. One of them had to do with, we had approved a retirement incentive payment for, and I think it was November that we approved it for, we asked teachers they have the ability to rescind until April, which obviously wreaks havoc with our budgeting process because we have to have our budget done in November. So what we did is we offered an incentive to the teachers to say, if you lock in and promise that you're going to waive that rescission ability, we would give you this additional incentive. It helped us on our budget significantly because we were able to budget at a lower step and track. So it was a good call, and we were able to, I think it was 5 teachers, right?
Yes.
5 teachers took advantage of that. So we had written into the agreement with the teachers that we could either choose to pay them out of end-of-year funds this year, or if we didn't have funding at this point, we could carry it into the first part of the next year after July. So that was our ask of the board. They took a look at where we're coming in and what our goals are, and they made the decision at a later meeting, which I believe I can share because it's public, that they would like us to pay those retirement incentives from the end of year balance this year. The numbers that you see in this report already count those as being paid out of this year. They were already factored in. It would have increased it if we'd changed it, so. And then the other decision that we had asked them to make is what to do with our remaining bond funds. I won't go too far into it, but there were 4 distinct options the board had to use those funds. The one that they did choose to do is to decommission the bond fund as of July 1st and use the proceeds that are left to offset our principal payment that we would be making in December of 2024. So what that will in essence do, we've budgeted for the full bond amount. We won't need to pay out the full bond amount, so that amount that we use to offset should be reflected at the end of next year as part of our unrestricted fund balance. And that I'd like to say that's it, but it seems like a lot, but that's the kind of the conclusion. Does anyone have any questions on any of the specifics?
What, are there savings by paying that down? I mean,
Unfortunately, no. When we contract for the bond, you're in for the haul.
Yeah.
But what we can do is we can offset our principal part of the payment, which means that we expend less of our budget.
See in the tuition side that, there's a fairly significant variance there. I was just curious about how vocational tuition is kind of decided. Is that like a year by year? Is it a multi-year kind of?
You want to talk to that? Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I've actually been spending a lot of time trying to come to terms with that because it is one of those things that can catch us by surprise. Basically what happens is the SST, which is the Career Technical Center that we work with, they receive state aid, and the law says up to the value of 75% of the tuition. The state has not fully funded what up to 75. They're typically funding more like 33%, but the SST does not know how much they're going to get until October, November, and that's when the rate for the year gets set. This year, there's no question, and the way the rate is set is they basically take the cost of all of the programs that they run, divide it by the number of students, and that becomes a cost per pupil that we pay. This year, that rate was $4,055. That was up about $300 per kid, which is quite a bit. That's a function of 2 things. One is the state aid coming in a little lower than it should be, because to be honest, if the state funded 75% like they're supposed to, we'd be paying more like $1,100 a kid. So we're absorbing that. And then the other component is every school district in the Seacoast is experiencing a decline in enrollment just because there are fewer kids. And so the total number of kids that we have in Newmarket are going down, but also the number of kids at SST. But the programs at SST the costs do not vary significantly just because there's a few less kids. Coincidentally, this year, we maintained the number of kids. We had about 70 Newmarket kids doing SST programs. And so basically what that means is when you do the math, the proportion of SST's budget that is coming from Newmarket went up in addition to the fact that state aid went down. So yeah, we had I think we budgeted $199 and it came in more like $284 when we finally paid it off. And we keep our fingers crossed that the state will more fully fund. I spoke to Jeff Beard, who's the DOE person who does career tech, and he's saying they're looking at up maybe as much as 40% reimbursement this year, which is like, okay. But what's unfortunate is they don't give you enough advance warning so you can plan it in your budget. So you kind of, it's a bit of a crapshoot, if you will. So we had to, for this year in particular, we had to absorb about $85,000 that we had not anticipated.
Anything else?
It's a great presentation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Really good.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us.
Okay. And Ty and Jenna, thank you. You guys always do a great job. Very complete presentation. We appreciate it. Thank you. The next item is the approval of the April 29 minutes. I'd reviewed it and had it updated with Patricia directly. So before you get it, it's been read over once. Does anybody have any adjustments that they need to make, they'd like to make on this? No? I'd like a motion to approve the minutes as prepared. Okay, motion made by Ned, seconded by Justin Lucer. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Okay, all in favor, thank you. One of the other things we talked about, there's a couple of things that we discussed. At the last meeting, we discussed the department meetings. On the town side, Steve indicated they're having a meeting on Wednesday of this week, and there'll be a staff meeting on Wednesday, and he'll be bringing it up with everybody to come back with proposed dates. And then we'll share that with everybody online, so we can find some dates that work for everybody. On the schools, Todd's been offering that they're very flexible in order to do tours of the schools. I guess what you're saying, that we'll do them after hours?
Yeah, we're happy to do whatever you would like. Just don't do it during graduation week, that's all.
Yeah.
But other than that, Dave Riley and I would,
And what week is that?
June 3rd through the 7th is graduation week. There's a lot going on at that time, but, after that or before then, if you.
All right,
you can
so
do
we'll
it in the
schedule
evening,
it for the
daytime, you
6th.
name it.
Just teasing. Okay, so you'll see an email out once we get some information from the town, and then some options from the town, and then we'll get it all together. I'll be asking the town if we can all go and not be a quorum, seen as an official meeting, since we won't be doing anything except reviewing the facilities. So that would give us a green light on that, we won't have to break it up into 2 or 3 groups. So we'll get a green light on that. The other thing, and I bring the hard copies to the meetings, but Scott indicated that it would be helpful if we got the hard copies beforehand. This is something I prepare before the meeting, so I'd have to ask the town to prepare that. Is that something that everybody would like?
Just want to just say, it's not a big deal, but realistically, we shouldn't be required to, and I like to do hard copy so I can write stuff. I read it and I print it and everything, but that's not something that we should have to do, I think. So if it was just, if you send something out that's saying, does anyone want a copy, and it's available, in the case of it's something from the school or something from the town. I know that's the way, I'm old, and we did it a long time ago.
Yeah.
It was always, and it was before everyone used email. But I can do it, it just, sometimes it's easier if that was available, I think.
Well, I can look into that.
Yeah.
See if, when we would make that
I
available.
mean, in this case, it was 11 pages, not a big deal, but sometimes it's a little bit more or something like that, and that's the time that my printer is out of ink or something like that, so.
Okay. How's everybody else feel about that? I'll ask them to see if they can.
It's an available thing, right, maybe
Some
no one
copies
wants it.
available. Yeah. Okay. All right. Anything else that anybody wants to bring up? I don't have anything else for tonight. July is obviously our month off, but I'm hoping in the next week or so we'll have the days to do our tours in June. So hopefully we will in July. Rich. Okay?
So are we having a meeting in June and the tours, or just the tours?
No, the next meeting is June 24th at 6:30.
Yep.
And so we will have a meeting next month. The town is up to present their Q3. And then July is our month of rest. Okay? All right, so do we have a motion to adjourn?
A motion to adjourn?
Motion made by Brian Rowley, seconded by Ned Carpenter. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.